Watership Down by Richard Adams. Book review. So, I don't know about you. I had never heard of this book growing up as a kid. It wasn't until I was in my 20s that, I don't know, I was in a conversation with somebody who was talking about this book, and I said, what? Watership Down? What is it? Some sort of naval battle story? And he was like, what? You never heard of Watership Down? He's like, that, you know, it's like a classic book. So, yeah, it's one of those things, I guess. I don't know how popular it is with young people nowadays. It's a book, and it was made into a movie. I think the movie came out late 70s, early 80s or something like that. It was a British film production. I'm not sure it got a wide release in America, but like it was distributed in some places. Like I think some people, it was in their local library as you could check out the video, or it was in your local video store, or it was shown on TV in the afternoons in some regions of the country with affiliate stations or something like that. I think, you know, in the days before like the internet made everything ubiquitous, a lot of this stuff was a bit more localized, or at least that's my excuse for never having heard of it all throughout the 80s and 90s, even though, you know, apparently this movie had a big impact on a lot of people of my generation. The movie, yeah, it's interesting. The book I found quite tame. I have not actually seen the movie to this day, but it's got a reputation for kind of being a little bit shocking for young children. So kind of people of my generation who saw this movie as really young kids, this scared them a little and made a big impression on them, which is kind of one of the claims to fame of this story, the notoriety. Anyways, backing up a bit, the name is really confusing. I'm sure I'm not the only person who's thought this. I heard Watership Down, and I thought, okay, some sort of ship on the water is going down. Probably, you know, this is a war story about a battleship that goes down in the water, or something like that, and it's nothing like that at all. So, Down is in England. It's kind of a hilly area. Was looking this up on Wikipedia just now. Apparently it comes from like the Celtic word or something like that. And then Watership is apparently the name of a hilly area in the south of England. Why do they call it Watership? I don't know. But that's the name of an area. So there's no ships in this book. Watership is just a geographical name. So it's Watership Down, down meaning the hilly area named Watership. So the entirety of this book happens on land. There are some rivers with a group of rabbits. Yeah, it's funny though, even after I've still finished the book, whenever I say Watership Down, I still have that association of like a ship sinking in the water. I don't know. Anyways, heard about this book in conversation with a friend. Never heard of it before, but what do they call that thing? The noticing effect? Like when somebody tells you something and then you hear it popping up all over the place all of a sudden, whereas like before you never heard of it before. That's what started to happen. I started noticing this get referenced in all sorts of things, coming up in conversation in places. Stephen King made a reference to it in The Stand, which I read recently. So, you know, eventually I decided to check this out. It's a children's classic. Actually, it's much more, it's not meant for little children. It's more kind of a young adult classic. I'm reading it from the perspective of an adult, but I figured better late than never. It is, you know, it is kind of a classic of sorts. So the book is about a bunch of rabbits in England in the area called Watership Down who go on this epic journey and encounter all this stuff. So apparently, the guy who wrote it, Richard Adams, had trouble getting it published because the publishers said the reading level is too advanced for young children, and older children are not going to be interested in a story about a bunch of rabbits. So yeah, they were reluctant to publish it. Of course, the book did get published and went on to become a huge success, but with apologies to the many fans of this book, I'm almost kind of leaning towards the side of the publishers on this one. I mean, obviously my opinion doesn't matter at all because it went on to become a huge success anyways, but it did strike me a little bit strange. It did seem like the level was a little bit too advanced for, at least for myself, to imagine me reading it as a little kid. But then once your reading level has become advanced enough to tackle something like this, aren't there just so many more interesting books out there than just a bunch of rabbits going on a journey? It did seem to me, however, like it was a perfect kind of school teacher type book. Like I could imagine my middle school teachers or the school librarian at my school being really enthusiastic about this book and encouraging us to read it and stuff like that. I mean, they didn't because, like I said, I never heard of this book as a kid. But it's a kind of book they would really like. It's a book in which the characters go on a journey. They all develop on this journey, undergo changes, they learn some life lessons. It's also very inoffensive, kind of the perfect book for schools. I thought there was very little violence in the book. There are some scenes with the rabbits fighting each other, but pretty tame stuff. In spite of the fact that the movie does have a reputation for having traumatized kids, I thought the book was pretty tame. My main criticism of the book is that it was too long for the type of story it was telling. So the author adds in tons of realism to the book. Like when it's these rabbits going on a journey, and at one point they need to cross a river. And any other author would have just been like, and then they crossed the river and went on. But Richard Adams kind of tries to be as realistic as possible, so he imagines all the trouble that a rabbit would have crossing a big river. Right? Because it's a big deal if you're a small rabbit. So these types of things were all throughout the book. It was really interesting at first, but I thought it went on for a bit too long. Kind of by the end of the book, I was just sick of all the obstacles these rabbits had to encounter along the way. I just kind of wished they would get to where they were going. That's my main criticism. The strong point of this book, the thing I really like, is the author does a really good job of imagining the world from a rabbit's perspective. So in this world, the rabbits have their own mythology, they have their own kind of folk tales and folk heroes, and they have their own language. And all of this is kind of based around a rabbit's view of the world. And kind of a rabbit's view of the world is they're like these small little creatures who are basically just food for everything else in the forest, right? All the foxes and hawks and owls and badgers, everything else is trying to eat the rabbits, and so they've developed their own mythology and folklore kind of around their worldview as life as a rabbit. I thought that was really clever. Now, a lot of people have taken this book as some sort of World War II analogy. The reason which there's some sort of kind of like a final stand against these evil rabbits who are kind of seen as kind of stand-in for fascism. The author Richard Adams has gone on record as saying no analogy is intended. This was not what he was trying to write about, but he did fight in World War II himself, and so people have read into it. And yeah, it's hard not to read into it, actually. It does really kind of seem, when the good rabbits are making a desperate last stand against the bad rabbits, that this is some sort of metaphor for Nazism. Now, there's no deep exploration of why a society would turn to fascism or something like that. It's just kind of fascism as in like you know, as seen from the perspective of the English, like this is our stand against the forces of evil type story. But the metaphor does seem to be there, whether the author intended it or not, or I don't know. That's the debate. All in all, I'd recommend it. Yeah, parts of it I liked, parts of it I didn't like, but and enough interesting stuff in here to merit a recommend. And you know, it's a classic of sorts.